May I request, please, for the video to play?
Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank TERI for organizing this event once again this year. We have less than 6 years to achieve the goals of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Global formats for learning and discussion like the summit are especially important. They help us find and implement common solutions that reduce social inequality and at the same time protect the environment. Sustainable consumption, sustainable production and resource efficiency are crucial if we want to achieve the agenda's sustainable development goals. This is what you will be talking about today. At global level, we have to decouple economic development from emissions and economic development from resource use. This is why we agreed the G7 Berlin Roadmap on resource efficiency and circular economy during Germany's G7 presidency in 2022. It provides a platform for international cooperation, and it is a catalyst for the transformation to circular economy. The roadmap stresses the importance of cooperation between G20 and G7. So I was delighted that India made circular economy a G20 focal issue last year. We were also able to adopt the high-level principles on lifestyles. I am delighted that we are continuing our work towards greater circularity and resource efficiency. If we strengthen consumer rights, we can also enhance environmental protection. 2 examples. First, the German government is working to secure reliable information for consumers on the sustainability of products. This will enable them to contribute to environmental protection in their everyday purchasing decisions. Second, I support the introduction of a right to repair. The goal is for products to be designed with durability in mind from the start. This will lead to consumer articles being used for longer and will save resources. There is no silver bullet for such a right to repair. We need a mix of instruments, from guidelines on eco-design to public outreach campaigns. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be meeting in Nairobi for UNEA 6 this month. I will be supporting a number of strong decisions at the meeting on strengthening circular economy, sustainable consumption and production, and a commitment to concluding negotiations on a global, legally binding agreement to reduce plastic waste by the end of this year. The huge amount of waste in our oceans is a clear illustration of why consumption and production have to become more sustainable. We can achieve this transformation if we work together. I wish you all productive discussions. Thank you.
Next, we have another video message from Professor Jim Ski, Chair of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, sharing his insights. May I have the please video?
Good morning and good afternoon. I'm really sorry not to be there in person at this important World Sustainable Development Summit 2024. I've just been at a high-level international meeting of Chief Justices and their equivalents from different countries of the world, which was exploring the role of judicial systems in addressing climate change. An extremely important meeting, so I hope you will excuse me. I'd like to start by noting that scientists have just revealed that global warming exceeded 1.5 degrees for the first time in 2023. And even after allowing for El Niño, we have seen truly exceptional developments, notably on ocean temperatures. Human-caused climate change is already affecting many weather and climate extremes in every region of the world. There's clear evidence of changes in extremes such as heat waves, heavy precipitation, droughts, tropical cyclones, and wildfires. But as humans, we do have the agency to avoid the greatest risks if we're prepared to put in place ambitious measures to both mitigate and adapt to climate change. Now, noting that this is part of a session on sustainable consumption, lifestyles and climate transitions, in the last IPCC mitigation report, we included, for the first time, a chapter on demand, services and social aspects of mitigation, and this speaks directly to the challenge. And of course, I'm well aware of India's lifestyle for the environment mission, and had the good fortune to discuss it with Government of India officials on my last visit. But before considering what can be done, let's consider the starting position. There are huge inequalities in consumption patterns, both geographically and within societies. In the last IPCC report on mitigation, we divided the world into 10 regions. Just 2 of these regions, Europe and North America, account for half of cumulative carbon dioxide emissions related to fossil fuels and industry since 1850, and for around 40% of total carbon dioxide emissions. At the other end of the scale, Southern Asia, of which India is the major part, accounted for 3.5% of cumulative fossil fuel-related emissions. Least developed countries contributed less than 0.4% of fossil fuel-related cumulative emissions, while small island developing states contributed just 0.5%. Clearly, those countries who are most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change have demonstrably contributed least. And the same pattern emerges if we take a snapshot of current emissions. Per capita greenhouse gas emissions range from 19 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent per capita in North America, down to 3.9 tonnes in Africa and just 2.6 tonnes in Southern Asia. And now let's turn to the individual and the household level. Globally, the 10% of households with the highest per capita emissions contribute between 34 and 45% of global consumption-based global greenhouse gas emissions, while the middle 40% contribute 40 to 53%, and the bottom 50% contribute just 13 to 15%. About 2/3 of the top 10% lived in developed countries and 1/3 in other economies. The lifestyle consumption emissions of the middle income and poorest citizens in developing countries are between 5 and 50 times below their counterparts in high income countries. So let's ask what can be done on the demand side. How much can we achieve? Our new demand-side chapter concluded that by 2050, comprehensive demand-side strategies could reduce direct and indirect greenhouse gas emissions by between 40 and 70% by 2050, compared to the baseline, across 3 end-use sectors: buildings, land transport and food. And this can be achieved while meeting the same needs for nutrition, shelter and mobility. And this demand-side mitigation can be achieved through changes in socio-cultural factors, infrastructure design and use, and end-use technology adoption. With policy support, socio-cultural options and behavioural change can reduce global greenhouse gas emissions by at least 5% in the near term, with most of the potential in developed countries. And much more is achievable if this is combined with improved infrastructure design and access to technology. Exercising choice at the individual level is important, but on its own it's just not enough. Think of electrified transport. People can choose electric vehicles, but they will only do so if manufacturers make technology available and there is a charging infrastructure. Note also that individuals with high socioeconomic status contribute disproportionately to emissions and have the highest potential for emissions reductions, and these are as citizens, investors, consumers, role models and professionals. So just to conclude, I'm truly sorry not to be in Delhi in person, but I am pleased to participate in a session on sustainable consumption lifestyles, something I championed when, along with my Professor Shukla from Ahmedabad University, I was co-chair of IPCC Working Group 3. My sincere best wishes for the rest of this session and for the rest of the conference.
We are truly honored to have such distinguished voices contributing to our session. Now, without further ado, I would like to welcome our esteemed chair for this session, Mr. R.R. Rashmi, a distinguished fellow at TERI, who will guide us through this important session. Sir, the floor is yours.
Am I audible? Thank you. Welcome once again to this interesting session on lifestyles. Sustainable consumption, lifestyles and climate transition. Now I'll begin with where Minister ended. He said two very important things. He talked about the consumption-led development, and he also talked about the discourse. Now he said that consumption-led development is a faulty model. This model of development has brought us today where we are, and we are battling with this huge problem of climate change. So this is one fundamental problem. The other problem is that it is not a part of the discourse at the global level where we are trying to battle it out. So these will be the two key questions which I will be posing to my panelists here. We have an excellent line of speakers here who will bring their own perspective on this issue. But the issue is that in a large part of the global south, the consumption-led development is not the current model. It is already not fully sustainable, but to a very large degree, the rate of consumption of resources is much lower than in the rest of the world. So to a certain extent, the lifestyles are different. But can only individual do it? Can only individual contribution helps us solve this problem? As Mr. Jimsky was saying, that individual-led behavior also has to be complemented with global efforts. So it has to form a part of the global discourse. So how do we solve this problem, both at the individual level, societal level, and at the global level where this discourse is taking place? Now, we are all aware of the lifestyle mission, the life which Prime Minister of India has announced, and we are fortunate to have Ms. Namita Prasad, the Joint Secretary in the Ministry of Environment, who is actually anchoring the Green Credit Program, which is a reflection of the concern about the lifestyle, the non-carbon benefits. So, Namita, I will request you first to approach this problem of how we can look at this problem, make it a part of the global discourse, and what does the future look like for us?
Am I audible? Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for that introduction. And I think to respond to your second question as to whether individual choices can make a difference. And that is why Prime Minister Modi had the life mission which he had announced. It is also not only about individual actions but getting communities together and looking at something, not only the consumption patterns, but how you can change the demand-driven factors which drive consumption. And to also put some facts on the table, the key findings from International Energy Agency's report, Life Lessons from India 2023 shows reduction of annual global CO2 emissions by more than 2 billion tons of CO2 equivalent in 2030 only through life actions. So this is the importance that life has as a development model which we have chosen also. And India goes back to the kind of traditional or sustainable practice of living which we always has. And this has further taken it ahead. And coming to your specific question with regard to GCP, I would say not only GCP, there's also EcoMark, in which we're trying to drive a more sustainable and a very planet-friendly kind of initiatives, which gives not only kind of initiative to people to take action, but also nudges people towards more environmental friendly action. And as you know, the Green Credit Program, it started off as a program which will reward positive environmental actions, which is that if you do something positive, you will get some reward for it. which does not happen across the other kind of reward programs which we have, because if you look at environmental issues, we only talking about carbon credits, which is like a negative externality somebody is addressing. Nobody is talking about if I do something, which is really substantial in terms of positive impacts, then how do I get rewarded for it? And can that act as an incentive? So that was the key problem that we took forward, and we now have the green credit program, and we're starting with plantations as a voluntary form of, plantations, which entities, organizations, philanthropies can take up, because plantations also are very important because they add so much to our, our environment. So this is the first step, and we'll have a series of such environmental actions which we can reward. And I think it's a very simple program which embeds the life philosophy into it. Similarly, we have the Eco-Mark program. And as you know, Eco-Mark program is a very old program of the ministry, which again tries to influence consumer choice through environment-friendly products. And now we have completely revamped the scheme, have a greater alignment with life, and try to influence the lifestyle choices which people can make by giving them a wide array of products in which they can make this choice. So I think India always has this alternative model of development in its mind, which, like we say, marries Prakriti with Pragati. So if we combine the two, that is what India's model is. And I think we all can work towards it, and it will give us major rewards in the future.
Fantastic. But would you also like to throw some light on how this can be internationalized? I mean, the practice which Government of India has tried to promote, what is the potential for this becoming a part of the global campaign?
In fact, that process has already started, and as you would know, that the COP27 cover decision, it noted that the importance of transition to sustainable lifestyles and sustainable patterns of consumption and production for efforts to address climate change. Then there's a G7 platform for net zero and well-being, which is very closely aligned to life principles. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization also talks about the need for a transition to sustainable lifestyles and sustainable consumption and production patterns. And as you know, they also G20 high-level principles on lifestyles for sustainable development. So what all these indicate is that there is an undercurrent of these kind of sustainable practices all across the world. And what life has done is to bring them to a platform where everybody can get energized by that and take action in their own fields. And not only India, but different countries have their own sustainable practices. Like I was reading about this thing called furoshiki wrapping cloth, which is a traditional form of gift wrapping in Japan, which again does not use paper, but uses cloth. So there are such practices which are already prevalent. And what happens with the lifestyle for environment is that you get everybody into a common platform, and it becomes a kind of one person nudges the other towards more environmental friendly action. And together this, I'm not saying we can solve all the problems, but yes, we can make a beginning towards solving such issues.
Yeah.
And that again, it's a question of mobilizing support for that and bringing to the table the fact that you can reduce emissions also by taking individual action.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Tim Gould, as the Chief Energy Economist of the International Energy Agency, you are looking at all forms of energy, and we are all, particularly your organization, is trying to promote investments in energy which are more sustainable. So how do you see this happening? What is the potential for this, and is it really positive, or do you see some roadblocks there?
Well, thank you very much, first of all, for the chance to participate in this important discussion. And I think Jim Skia started this in a good place, because I think this has to start with a recognition of today's inequalities, both in terms of energy use and of course, in emissions as well. And we were very grateful for the Indian initiative, Prime Minister Modi's initiative, to put this issue of sustainable lifestyles on the table in the G20. And to answer another question of yours, one of the things that we were keen to do last year is really to internationalize this by looking at what it would mean then for global efforts to reach our sustainable development goals and climate targets if these were broadly adopted. And I'm grateful also to the Joint Secretary for highlighting some of the outcomes of that analysis, because 2 gigatons of emissions reductions by 2030, if these were broadly adopted, that is no small matter. And I think it's also very important to highlight that another point from the Joint Secretary is that the majority of the change has to be made in the advanced economies, because that's where, you know, this excessive consumption in some senses is concentrated. That said, I am a little uneasy with the way that this can sometimes be framed as putting the responsibility on individuals, or putting the responsibility, you know, on individuals that may not be in a position to take the choices that are being advocated. And there's a very important role here for policy, for infrastructure, to help people make more sustainable choices. So in the dialogue that we have with governments, this is now integrated very much into our thinking on energy transitions, because it is clear that governments can make it easier for individuals, can make it easier for communities to take informed and sustainable decisions about their energy use, in the way that they design transport infrastructure, in the information that they provide to consumers as they're making choices about appliances or anything else that they bring into their homes that uses energy. And I think there's an important industrial component here as well about resource efficiency and so on. So I think there's multidimensional elements to this, and it's been a very important step to raise awareness about the possibilities of moving us in that direction coming from the G20 presidency in India.
Good. Let me move, Mr. Satyajit Bhatkal, let me move to you. You are the CEO of Pani Foundation and Satyamev Jayate, we all remember. So, from your perspective, you have seen these things at the ground level, and in terms of the individual, awareness is important.
Right.
But do you also see this as a social problem, society's responsibility of society, and how can we marry these two?
Right. I think that's a great question, and I think that the Honourable Minister and then Mr. Jimsky really laid out the context for this, because we are dealing with the existing reality of the fact that there is an inequitous situation on the ground in terms of the carbon footprint of rich countries versus poor, and on the other hand of rich people within each country and those who do not have resources. But having said that, cynicism can never be a solution to this situation. So what we really need to work towards, in my opinion, is that apart from individual based solutions, how do we create a culture in all communities of being planet respecting, of being natural resource respecting, of being respecting of all forms of life, and of understanding just how critical the situation is. Because for any dialogue to go forward, I think it's very important that everybody should be, be on the same page in terms of the information and the facts as far as the graveness of the challenge of climate change is concerned. And there I feel that there is a lot of work that remains to be done. A lot of work has been done, but a lot of work remains to be done. At Pani Foundation, what we are trying to do is to create awareness among farmers and people in rural areas about issues connected with natural resource management and their impact on climate change. One of the things, for example, which we did a few years back, and so I'm just going to connect this with what is the fundamental kind of thrust of my answer to you, is that I think that for any real movement on this to happen, Mr. Rashmi, we will really need to have behavioral change on scale. And that behavioral change will have to happen everywhere. I cannot impact behavioral change in a developed country, but perhaps I can have a little bit of an influence in terms of the behavioral change of my own and in our country. And every contribution is going to be important if we are going to achieve the goals that have been set out for our own country and for the world. The way to do that, I think, is how do we make this cool? How do we make this fun? How do we make this aspirational? Because anything which is made onerous and a burden, nobody wants to do. Nobody wants to be preached to, nobody wants gyan. What we did at Pani is we created a competition. It was called the Satyamev Jayate Water Cup. And in that water cup, villages were incentivized by means of a prize. So it was a competition. Villagers competed for a prize. And because it was fun, we had hundreds of thousands of villagers participating in highly climate harmonious behavior, putting their time, money and energy into solving their own problem, which is also what we are doing now with farming. And so the broad thrust of what I'm saying is this, that there are strategies and designs in which we can make fighting climate change fun, and we need to work on that.
Certainly. Of course, but the models will need to be different in developing countries and developed countries.
Certainly.
As you
certainly.
said, behavioral problem. Now, where does the problem lie? Is the problem in generating the waste or handling the waste? So, where do we place the right emphasis? And it needs to be handled with strategy. Dr. Tejal Kanitkar, let me come to you now. You have been studying the consumption, production of energy, energy modeling, emissions at the global level. So, what is your take on this? Where are we heading for? Is it really a problem within our reach, or it's intractable?
Okay. That's a big question. I wouldn't say that it's intractable.
Looking at lifestyles.
Yeah. I wouldn't say it is intractable, but I really do think we must focus on where the problem is. I would really like to thank the Minister as well as Jim for having put the question of differentiation at the center of the debate here, because a lot of times when we discuss lifestyles and production, consumption, etc., we discuss it as if the world is a homogeneous whole, societies are a homogeneous whole, and nothing is far from the truth. For example, there are no farmers in India. There are small farmers, there are marginal farmers, there are middle peasants, there are large farmers. There is differentiation within countries, there is differentiation across countries, and I think that is at the crux of the issue. And one of the problems, I think, about a lot of this discussion on lifestyles, as well as what we now see in the academic literature as decent living standards, is that the focus is entirely, almost entirely, on what is seen as the problem of emerging economies, where you see development happening now, and so you're telling them, this is not how you develop, we don't want you to make the same mistakes we did. So you have a lot of literature from the global north essentially saying, fine, we made a mistake and we need to change some of the things that we've done, but you don't make the same mistakes, without really offering a solution for what that really means. And we have, I think, a lot of the behavioral change literature also tilts in the same direction very often. And it is a typical problem, I think, that the Minister highlighted of developed countries. It's always do as I say, don't do as I do. So, you don't actually see any kind of shifts in, let's say, urban design, in retrofitting. You see some kinds of shifts in, renewable energy use or electric vehicle use, for example. Electric SUVs are shooting through the roof in Europe currently. So you have, you shift the way in which you are consuming, perhaps to a certain extent, with some nudges and some incentives, but there is no transformational change that you see there. The only direction for transformational change is given to us, is given to those of us in the developing countries to say that this is how you must do. But I think the crux of the problem really is that you do need energy. There is no going away from the fact that you need energy. And it's not simply enough to say you need energy just for poverty alleviation. You need energy for building schools, you need energy for building roads, for building hospitals, for providing employment. And it's that embedded energy that really matters. It's not about how, whether I switch off my light when we leave the room, or whether I use an LED versus an incandescent bulb, but really about what is it that well-being means, universal well-being really means. And if that means that you are going to require a certain amount of energy, then the global question that you raised is about actually converging not in terms of emissions, but converging in terms of energy. And then if you actually have that conversion, where developed countries consuming more than 200 gigajoules per person right now, and sub-Saharan Africa at less than 10 gigajoules per person right now, if you have a convergence, even if that convergence is at global average levels of about 75 gigajoules, you're going to get much more than 2 billion, like the IEA report says, much more than 2 billion in terms of savings, just from energy use reductions in the global north. I think that is where the crux of the question is. Let's talk about energy reduction of energy consumption in the global north. It's not, you can't tell, you won't be able to solve the problem by telling those who are already starving to go on a diet.
Good. So individual behavior, awareness, social behavior, they're all important, but it's also important that we see some kind of a commitment there at the global level. Let me come to the last but not the least speaker today, Mr. Golopils. You are with the Brahma Kumaris, so obviously you will have a different perspective on this whole issue. So how do you see this evolving? Okay. You're most welcome. And sir, we have 4 minutes.
Yes, I'm aware. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much for the invitation, and also congratulations to TERI for the 50th anniversary. Let me say Om Shanti and Namaskar. A bit about the Brahma Kumaris. We're a spiritual organization and we teach Raja Yoga meditation. We have 6,000 centers in India and 1,000 abroad, and I will highlight a bit our institutional perspective to the question. I joined Brahma Kumaris 40 years ago, came 85 first to India, and 30 years ago we have established a Department of Renewable Energies. Since then we carried out plenty research projects in solar cooking. Our solar cooker can cook 35,000 meals by the power of sun. We have set up wind, photovoltaic, battery hybrid systems. 5 years ago we commissioned a 1 megawatt solar thermal power station with storage, which is operating nicely. And meanwhile, we are operating more than 1,000 solar systems in the country in our centers, and we actively encourage our members to go green. We also do a lot of R&D projects right now. A new biogas plant is coming up. We are testing a novel vanadium battery with the IIT in Bombay, and we also set up a new solar cooking system based on induction, photovoltaic and battery system. So lots of activities to develop clean technology, and we actively encourage our members to go green, our centers to go green. We have a green policy also. And in 2009, we have created an environmental initiative, and I had a chance since 2009 to participate at all UN climate conferences. And there we promote plastic-free home. We offer a travel compensation, and we have also programs and propagate vegetarian or plant-based diet. And by the way, this is one of the biggest personal contribution you can do, and I hope you might consider to go vegetarian or plant-based. It's the biggest contribution, I repeat. The news from the COP28 are a bit mixed. On one side, a lot of new agreements have been signed. The language is a bit vaguely. On the other side, carbon emissions are going on, and we're heading right now, as per the latest data, to 2.7 degrees above pre-industrial levels. So the negative trend is still unbroken. Humanity is racing against time, and we're also dealing with the dreadful tipping points in climate, which are telling us anytime anything can happen. So we are all aware about this problem since many, many years, and it seems the remedies of finance, strategy, technology is incomplete. So the big question is, what is missing? I come now to the spiritual part. It seems we lost connection to ourself, to our inner goodness. We lost inner peace, and that leads to conflict. We lost connection to the divine love, and that causes sometimes emptiness, and we cover it up with overconsumption, and we buy more and more. And I agree also that the West here is really responsible for all the emissions and really has to come forward with a lot of lifestyle changes. Science and even more leadership needs urgently also an injection of values and ethics, and has to recalibrate the global compass to bring our ship afloat. After all, we live on one planet, one world. I like the motto of the G20 very much. And Mahatma Gandhi said there's enough on this planet for man's need, but not for man's greed. And greed is one of the big problems, is one of the driver of climate change also. So how to bring change to ourselves and also to reconnect. Well, I practice since 40 years meditation regular, and I can say daily meditation is a powerful tool to reconnect with my inner values, with my inner powers, and bring a lasting change into my behavior pattern. And that is all about changing behavior. 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the evening is enough. It's a step-by-step approach, and you're changing on the inside. After all, what I love, I take care. I don't destroy. If we all connect to our inner goodness, it will become easy for us also as a global community to join hands. And that's what's important. The world has to join hands because climate change is now everywhere. Let love and peace rule the world. Let me become a true leader. This summit is all about true leadership. Let me become a true leader of myself and then an example to others. India is among the oldest civilizations with a fabulous spiritual legacy and insights, and it has all the potential to inspire the world and pave the way for a sustainable and for a harmonious future. Om Shanti. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. With this, we have come to the end of the first round of our discussion and deliberation. We have some time left for question and answer. So if you have any questions, kindly raise your hands, name yourself, and then also name the panelist to which the question is addressed. And kindly be brief with your questions.
Yeah, hello and good afternoon, everyone. So my question, actually, I had 3 questions, but Rashmi sir said like to be please be brief. So what I think is I will go with 2 questions. Maybe we should talk about the embodied energy concept, as we are talking about the the lifestyle and responsible consumption. So what question I had was about the use of some unwanted materials that we can skip and how to go after that. For example, let us consider tissue paper. So it is a Western concept. So in India, we never use tissue paper. We can use just hand wash, and then we can go after it. But these materials like maybe tissue papers or aluminum foils.
Question, sir, question.
Yes, sir. So my question was about that, like how we can transition from the materials which have hidden embodied energies like tissue paper or maybe aluminum foil to the conventional one, and next about, and more importantly, the fast fashion trend. So that these were my 2 questions. Maybe leather processing or setting up, like Miss Namita can answer better, like setting up EPR targets for FMCG industries or maybe textile industries, something like that. Thank you so much.
Maybe the first part of question I can direct to you, Mr. Bhatkal, and second part, of course, to Namita.
Well, there are many corporates already who are implementing policies on this, and finally this is connected towards creating a culture about environment awareness. As that culture gets created, more and more people will adopt what you're saying.
Would you like to say something about the EPR?
So that EPR is a very good example of what we are trying to say in terms of responsible consumption as well as production. So in the ministry, we see the problem not just from one aspect, but for different aspects, and we have to keep the industrial point of view also, because you cannot impose any standards, because all of the choices that we make will have economic consequences. So EPR is one very successful model which we developed in consultation with industry, and this kind of approach, the circularity approach, is a very well embedded principle which we're trying to implement in other areas of the of consumption patterns and changing production patterns also.
Okay. Yes, sir. The gentleman here.
Yeah, we are talking of behavioral changes. I think food habits of vegetarian can be a big behavioral change. If we make it a mandatory for whole world, then it can make a lot of difference. The rest of the world is compelling us to do other things.
Sir, that's an opinion, but it cannot be. I don't think it can be a question. It's an opinion. Yes. Yes, sir. Gentleman at the back.
I'm Kumaresh Mishra. A quick question, like Mr. Bhatkal mentioned about the Pani Foundation and incentivizing in terms of behavioral changes. Now, how do you multiply this? Many of these NGOs and others start a very good experiment in a village or a group of villages or in a particular part of a district. But the challenge becomes, how do you multiply it? How do you take to other areas? Or you just become ambassador for one set of methodology, or should the government adopt it and help it in multiplication?
How do you multiply?
Well, we worked very closely with the government of Maharashtra, and we are really grateful to them for all their support, because we really managed to multiply very fast and on a very large scale. So we started in as little as 3 blocks in the year 2016, and in 24 months we were in 8,000 villages, 24 districts, and there were several 100,000 villagers involved with this work on watershed management, and that movement continues down to this day. So it's not that it was a flash in the pan. And now it's working on creating a model for sustainable farming on the same model. So yes, partnership with government is critical. Without that, there's no question of scaling up. And in fact, the government does and continues to support this. And I think there's a lot of possibilities of how we can continue using such partnerships in the field of the environment.
Okay. You would like to respond? Yeah.
To add, I think this sort of skepticism about how we can scale is not, it need not be there, because the government of India has done things at scale on so many fronts. If you look at the PDS system, you look at what the IMD has done, for example, in terms of agro-advisory services, services for fisheries, etc. These things have been done at scale by the government of India. Even if you just simply look at things like energy efficiency, where the first round of CFLs, all of that happened because there were innovative ways in which governments provided subsidies for uptake of this. So it's when you do things at scale, and I agree completely, you need the government. You can't do it, at individual sort of levels. Otherwise, it remains as pilot effects. But we have a whole set of examples, not just in the area of energy efficiency and sustainability, but generally in the area of service provision itself that have been done at scale. I think there's enough lessons to learn from there in terms of how we can do other things as well at scale.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Welcome.
Also, when you're talking about scaling up, also, I think environmental issues are very local in nature. So scaling up also should not mean like a standard which everybody has to adhere to. So local problems need local solutions, and there is a beauty in having a very localized solution to a problem which may not be possible to scale up, but it still has value because it serves the purpose for which the solution was developed. So the answer to everything cannot be scaling up, but depends upon the needs of that technology and how well it can be transferred to a larger scale. I think we should keep that in mind also.
Okay. Yes, Dr. Shalin Singh.
Okay. Hi, my question is to Namita ji. How is the Forest Conservation Amendment Bill that was passed last year, which allows forest land to be diverted for commercial or other public infrastructure projects, in alignment with India's net zero goals?
I'm sorry, I missed your question. Can you please introduce yourself once again?
Sure. My name is Ida Swasti, and I wanted to understand how the Forest Conservation Amendment Bill that was passed last year in December, which allows reserve forests to be used for commercial purposes or public infrastructure projects, in alignment with India's net zero goals.
Well, I don't think your question is directly linked to the question which panelists have tried to answer, but I think we can have a separate discussion on this.
Absolutely, we could have a discussion on that.
Yes.
Thank you. Shalin Singhal. How do we maximize on consumption of indigenous knowledge at all levels to optimize consumption of material?
Any one of you? Would you like to take this?
Yeah, I must say I'm generally a little careful when I answer questions on indigenous knowledge, because very frankly, I don't understand what it means. There is a whole range of indigeneity and how we understand indigeneity. It works differently in different contexts. And there is also a huge issue of deprivation, especially in the context of indigenous peoples. It's not, we must be careful not to glorify poverty in some sense and not to glorify deprivation. It's also very difficult lives. So, the goal must be to remove people from drudgerous lives, especially women and children who face the brunt of it across the country, across the world, especially in marginalized contexts. But there are, of course, lessons to be learnt in terms of conservation, etc., in different ways, and we must make sure that those are on board. But unless we define what we mean by indigenous knowledge, by traditional knowledge, and in what context we want to understand it, it's very difficult to answer that question, especially with climate change, which we have all agreed is an unprecedented problem in human history. If it's an unprecedented problem, and the last time it happened was when there were no humans around, then there cannot be any traditional knowledge about it. So, how is it that we then address it? So that's why I know I've not answered your question. It's a bit of a go around to that question, but I think it needs some much more serious reflection as to what it means.
Yes. A question here. A microphone here, please.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Shivam Srivastav. As we see, our society is not very acceptable to change, be it subsidies or, for that matter, a reservation. Those are tangible things. But if we expect to inculcate that a lifestyle changes in our lifestyle, so don't you think that is sort of a generational thing, and the role of academia is also very important, especially at the primary level? If anyone can.
Mr. Tim, would you like to?
So I didn't catch the last part of the question.
This is
about a
generational change.
I must admit, I'm always slightly skeptical of the idea that a change of generations is going to be enough to get us onto a different pathway. I feel that there is much more that needs to be done to shape a new set of constraints, a new set of attitudes as people move through education and on. And I feel, again, if I look at my own example, I mean, the International Energy Agency is based in Paris. And Paris for the last, I've been living there 15 years. And it was mentioned that there's not much happening on these issues in advanced economies. Well, Paris is a very different place now than it was 15 years ago. Paris used to be a city that was a motorist city. A lot of the big highways and byways in Paris have now been shut off to cars. They are open to pedestrians, they are open to bikes. It's improved my quality of life as someone who cycles in to Paris each day. But I think the change that took place reveals something about the political economy of some of the issues that we're discussing. Because when those decisions were taken, the person taking the decision, in this case it was the mayor of Paris, felt a very concentrated opposition from the motorists of Paris. But there was no countervailing sort of welcome from people because they didn't know yet that they would attach value to that change. If anyone tried to reverse it today, there would be many, many voices saying that is unacceptable. But when the change was first made, it was difficult, and it came at a political cost. So I think managing those upfront costs, whether it's a financial cost or indeed a sort of a cost of social opposition, is also a very important part of some of the things that we need to do, because otherwise the patterns will repeat themselves over time, I feel.
Yes.
Yes. Add here.
Oh, to this question? Yeah.
I am Amit Singh. Yeah.
Just a moment, please. Let him
I think it's a wonderful example of what behavioral change actually does. So it created a constituency for people who attached a value, as you put it, to a pedestrianized and a bicyclized city, which is not to take away from the importance or need for motor cars, but it created a constituency which enables further such changes to be done. So this kind of behavioral change, I think, is a very, very important step which we need to be doing wherever in the world we are.
There are a few questions, but I had one question which I myself wanted to ask all the panelists. This whole issue of sustainable lifestyle choices. When sustainable lifestyle itself is a paradigm shift, but when you make this choice, can you really leave it entirely to the individual to make that choice, or you have to make a social investment there? Can we build a business model around this which makes it sustainable so that it moves on its own? I think I heard the minister talking about circularity or resource efficiency. What are the models which can push this kind of sustainable behavioral choice and lifestyle choices? Can we begin with you? Yes?
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, I agree completely that in fact, I think a very small percentage of it really comes from behavioral nudges at the end. A large part of it is structural in the first place. So if I have access to public transportation, if I live in housing which requires minimal or optimal heating or cooling, then half of the battle is won. Of course, in terms of choices of how many clothes, etc., is a different question altogether. But the embedded energy that somebody was talking about in my daily life itself a lot of it is structurally embedded, right? So if I have, for example, if I don't have to travel 5 kilometers with a car to buy groceries every day, like you have to do it in many places in the US, for example, and you get your daily needs very close to your housing if you don't have to commute too much for work. So a lot of it is about how societies are designed, how how systems are designed, and so that's really where I think a lot of focus must be. The behavioral change comes. So once things happen, changes happen, there is buy-in into those changes eventually. There might be opposition perhaps earlier, and there has to be a political cost that perhaps needs to be paid. But yeah.
Tim, you have partly answered that question, but would you like to add something there?
I think on the issue of circularity, by and large, the shift that we're talking about through energy transitions means extracting less resources from the earth. That is an entirely welcome development. But let's not imagine that we get away completely from the need for extractive industries. Because we have to recognize that many of the technologies that we need for this transformation are also, they have their resource requirements. They are less than those of fossil fuels, and of course there's no combustion involved. But the metals that go into batteries, some of the minerals that are needed for solar panels, for electric motors, these also we need to be thinking about those in a sustainable manner as possible. So that means responsible mining, and it also means appropriate policies for recycling and end of life for these batteries. If it's batteries, it's already visible that by the end of this decade, there will be a first sort of cohort of EV batteries that will be reaching the end of their first existence, as it were. And thinking through already now how we are going to prepare ourselves for that moment is incredibly important.
Namita, coming to you, do you think time has come now for some kind of a mandatory framework for this kind of thing in India?
I do, like Tejal said, structural change is very important, because ultimately you need a power which will harness all these changes and make it out for people to really implement that. But and the governments are somehow placed at the best level to be able to influence that through policy and through programs and through various kind of initiatives they might be taking. But to have maybe a mandatory kind of a regime or something which somebody always has to adhere to does seem a little bit maybe overreaching probably, and would probably get a lot of pushback if you have some like a minimum. You of course can have minimum standards, but maybe beyond that, say that okay, this one rule applies to everybody, does seem a little bit undemocratic also. Okay. So there has to be a way around where a process is built which is consultative, with the government engaging in that consultative process and then coming out with something. And once you have that buy-in and acceptability among a large group of people, that policy will work much better rather than a government which just comes out with the policy and says you need to do it.
Very well said. Mr. Bhatkal, any last words on this?
No, I think it's been a wonderful discussion, so I don't want to take away from the participants.
Okay. With this, we have come to the end of this extremely interesting session.
One last question.
I don't think we have enough time left now for any further questions. My own question took a lot of time. So thank you once again. Let me thank all the panelists for giving their insightful comments and enriching the discussion. I have learned a lot from all of you. I am sure the people who are present here, they have listened to the different perspectives. I mean, there cannot be a common perspective on lifestyle choices. The societies are at different stages of development, so everybody comes with one's own mindset. But certainly there is a common purpose which we are all trying to achieve. And let me again thank all of them and all of you for listening to them with patience. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. As we bring this session to an end, on behalf of TERI and WGS team, I would like to express a sincere appreciation to each speaker for contributing to this meaningful discussion and gracing us with their presence. I would now request the speakers to come forward for a group photograph.